In the grand halls of Windsor Castle, where centuries of royal protocol have been carved into stone and tradition, a 10-year-old girl was about to change everything. Princess Charlotte Elizabeth Diana, third in line to the British throne, had always been known for her spirited nature and sharp mind. But on this particular autumn morning in 2025, as golden leaves danced outside the castle windows, she would demonstrate something that would leave even the most seasoned military officers speechless. What happened in those few moments when a young princess corrected a decorated general would not just showcase her understanding of royal duty, it would reveal the makings of a future queen who refuses to let tradition overshadow truth. This is the story of how Princess Charlotte's defining moment at 10 years old sent ripples through the monarchy, captured the heart of a nation, and proved that sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest wisdom. The guard who witnessed it all would later say it was the moment he truly understood what it means to serve not just the crown, but the character beneath it. The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of Windsor Castle like whispered secrets from centuries past. Princess Charlotte Elizabeth Diana Windsor stood at her bedroom window, watching the household cavalry prepare for the weekly inspection ceremony below. At 10 years old, she possessed the keen observation skills that had become her trademark among the castle staff, combined with an intensity that sometimes unnerved even the most experienced courtiers. Charlotte had always been different from her brothers. While Prince George carried himself with the quiet dignity expected of a future king, and Prince Louis brought joy and laughter wherever he went, Charlotte burned with a curiosity that seemed to illuminate everything around her. She questioned everything, absorbed knowledge like a sponge, and had an uncanny ability to notice details that others missed entirely. This particular Tuesday morning had started like any other in the Windsor routine. Charlotte had awakened at 7 sharp, as was her custom, and completed her morning preparations with the efficiency her governess had praised. Her school uniform was pressed to perfection, her hair neatly braided, and her shoes polished until they reflected the autumn sunlight streaming through the diamond-paned windows. But as she prepared to head downstairs for breakfast with her family, something caught her attention in the courtyard below. The household cavalry was assembling for what appeared to be a special ceremony. Charlotte recognized several faces among the gathered soldiers, including Captain Morrison, who had taught her about military protocol during one of her educational visits to the barracks earlier that year. What made this morning different, however, was the presence of General Sir Marcus Whitmore, a distinguished officer Charlotte had met during the summer's Trooping the Colour ceremony. The general was known throughout the military community as a stickler for protocol and tradition, someone who had spent his entire career upholding the standards that made the British military the respected force it was worldwide. Charlotte had learned much about military customs from her grandfather, King Charles, who had shared stories of his own military service and the importance of proper protocol. She had also spent countless hours with her father, Prince William, listening to tales of his time as a helicopter pilot and the respect he held for military tradition. These conversations had given her a deep appreciation for the ceremony and precision that defined military life. As she watched from her window, Charlotte noticed the soldiers moving into formation. Their red tunics gleamed in the morning light, their bearskin caps perfectly aligned, and their movements synchronized with the precision that had made the household cavalry legendary. But something seemed off to her trained eye, something that nagged at her consciousness like a melody played slightly out of tune. The ceremony was meant to honor a group of young cadets who were graduating from the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. Charlotte had read about the academy in her studies and knew that this was one of the most prestigious military institutions in the world. The cadets stood at attention, their faces serious and proud, aware that this moment represented years of hard work and dedication. General Whitmore stepped forward to address the assembled group. Even from her window, Charlotte could see the authority he commanded, the way every soldier straightened at his approach. His chest displayed numerous medals and decorations earned through decades of distinguished service, and his bearing spoke of a man who had dedicated his life to duty and honor. But as the general raised his hand in salute to acknowledge the cadets, Charlotte's sharp eyes caught something that made her heart skip a beat. The salute, while impressive and commanding, was not quite right. It was a subtle error, one that most observers would never notice, but Charlotte's extensive education in royal and military protocol had trained her to see such details. The realization hit her like a bolt of lightning. General Whitmore, this decorated officer whom everyone respected and admired, had made a mistake in his salute. It wasn't a matter of disrespect or carelessness. Charlotte understood that immediately. It was simply an error, perhaps caused by the slight nervousness that even experienced officers might feel during important ceremonies, or maybe the result of mixing protocols from different branches of service. Charlotte's first instinct was to dismiss what she had seen. After all, Who was she, a 10-year-old princess, to question a distinguished general? But the teachings of her parents echoed in her mind. Both Prince William and Princess Catherine had always emphasized that truth and accuracy were more important than comfort or convenience. They had taught their children that sometimes the right thing to do was also the difficult thing to do. Standing at her window, Charlotte felt the weight of a decision that seemed far too large for her young shoulders. She could pretend she hadn't noticed the error and go down to breakfast as planned. No one would ever know, and the ceremony would continue without incident. The general's reputation would remain unblemished, and the day would proceed according to schedule. But Charlotte had been raised to understand that with privilege comes responsibility. Her education had emphasized that those in positions of authority, whether through birth or achievement, had an obligation to ensure that standards were maintained and truth was honored. The question that faced her was whether a 10-year-old girl had the right, or perhaps the duty, to point out an error made by someone so much more experienced and respected. As she wrestled with this dilemma, Charlotte remembered a conversation she had had with her great-grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, during one of their private tea times before her passing. The late Queen had shared a story about a young soldier who had once corrected her own mistake during a ceremony. Rather than being offended, Queen Elizabeth had thanked the soldier and made sure the error was corrected. She had told Charlotte that true leadership meant being open to correction and learning, regardless of where that correction came from. The memory of her great-grandmother's words gave Charlotte courage, but it also filled her with uncertainty. Queen Elizabeth II had been an adult when that incident occurred, someone with the authority and experience to handle such situations gracefully. Charlotte was just a child, still learning about the world and her place in it. Down in the courtyard, the ceremony continued. General Whitmore was now speaking to the cadets about honor, duty, and the proud traditions they were joining. His words carried the weight of experience and conviction, and Charlotte could see how the young soldiers hung on every word. They saw him as a role model, someone who embodied everything they hoped to become in their own military careers. Charlotte's internal struggle intensified as she realized the broader implications of the situation. If she said nothing, the incorrect salute might be noticed by others later, perhaps in photographs or video recordings of the ceremony. The general could face embarrassment or criticism, which seemed unfair given his distinguished service record. On the other hand, if she spoke up and was wrong about the protocol, she could cause unnecessary disruption and potentially damage relationships between the royal family and the military establishment. The young princess found herself wishing she could consult with her parents or her private secretary, but they were all engaged in their own morning schedules. Prince William was meeting with government officials about environmental initiatives, while Princess Catherine was reviewing plans for an upcoming charity event. Charlotte was on her own to make this decision, and time was running short as the ceremony moved toward its conclusion. As she stood there, torn between action and inaction, Charlotte caught sight of someone who would prove to be crucial to the events that were about to unfold. Sergeant James Patterson, one of the guards she had come to know during her time at Windsor, was positioned near the courtyard entrance. Charlotte had always liked Sergeant Patterson because he treated her with respect while still maintaining appropriate formality. More importantly, he had shown genuine interest in her education about military matters and had often answered her questions about protocol and tradition. An idea began to form in Charlotte's mind. Perhaps she didn't have to make this decision entirely on her own. Sergeant Patterson was someone she trusted, someone who would understand both the military significance of what she had observed and the delicate nature of her position as a young member of the royal family. If she could find a way to speak with him discreetly, maybe together they could determine the best course of action. The challenge, however, was finding an opportunity to speak with Sergeant Patterson without disrupting the ceremony or drawing unwanted attention to herself. Charlotte knew that her movements were always monitored for security reasons, and any deviation from her normal routine would be noticed by her protection officers. She would need to be clever and careful if she wanted to handle this situation appropriately. As the ceremony in the courtyard reached its midpoint, Charlotte made her decision. She would find a way to speak with Sergeant Patterson, not because she was certain about what she had seen, but because she knew that remaining silent when she might be able to help was not the kind of person she wanted to become. Her great-grandmother's words echoed in her mind once more, reminding her that leadership often meant taking action even when the outcome was uncertain. Charlotte turned away from her window and began planning how she would navigate the next few minutes. She knew that the path ahead would require courage, wisdom, and more than a little luck. But she also knew that some moments in life demand action, regardless of age or experience. As she prepared to leave her room, Princess Charlotte had no idea that she was about to embark on a journey that would define not only her own character, but also her future role as a member of the British royal family. The morning mist was beginning to clear from the castle grounds, and soon the events that would unfold would be as clear and undeniable as the autumn sunshine streaming through the ancient windows of Windsor Castle. Charlotte moved through the castle corridors with the quiet determination that had become her hallmark. The thick Persian carpets muffled her footsteps as she navigated the familiar passages, her mind racing with the complexity of the situation she was about to enter. The ancient portraits of her ancestors seemed to watch her progress, their painted eyes holding centuries of royal wisdom and the weight of decisions made in moments just like this one. As she approached the main staircase that would take her closer to the courtyard, Charlotte encountered Mrs. Henderson, her senior lady-in-waiting, who was reviewing the day's schedule with characteristic precision. Mrs. Henderson had served the royal household for over 2 decades and possessed an intuitive understanding of the family's needs and routines that bordered on the supernatural. "Your Royal Highness," Mrs. Henderson said with a warm smile, "you're up and about early this morning. Breakfast won't be served for another 20 minutes. Charlotte paused, recognizing that this encounter could either help or hinder her mission. Mrs. Henderson was someone she trusted implicitly, but explaining her current situation would require time they didn't have, and might result in well-meaning adults taking control of the situation before she could assess it properly. "I wanted to watch the ceremony from the terrace," Charlotte replied, choosing her words carefully. It wasn't a lie, merely an incomplete truth. "I've been studying military protocol in my lessons, and I thought observing a real ceremony might help me understand it better." Mrs. Henderson's face lit up with approval. The royal children's education was always a priority, and their genuine interest in learning was something the entire household staff took pride in supporting. "That's wonderful, Your Royal Highness. Your dedication to your studies continues to impress everyone. Shall I arrange for someone to accompany you?" This was exactly what Charlotte had hoped to avoid, but she knew that pushing back too strongly would raise suspicions. "I think I'll be fine on my own for now," she said. "I know the way well, and I won't go anywhere inappropriate." Mrs. Henderson considered this for a moment, her experienced eye noting Charlotte's unusual intensity. After years of service, she had developed an almost mystical ability to sense when members of the royal family were dealing with something significant, even when they weren't ready to share what that something might be. "Very well," Mrs. Henderson said finally. "But please remember to stay within the designated viewing areas, and if you need anything at all, Sergeant Patterson is stationed near the courtyard entrance today." Charlotte felt a surge of gratitude mixed with relief. Mrs. Henderson had unknowingly provided her with the perfect opening to approach Sergeant Patterson without it seeming unusual or planned. Sometimes, Charlotte reflected, the universe seemed to align in ways that suggested her great-grandmother's spirit was still watching over the family. "Thank you, Mrs. Devereux." "Henderson. I'll remember that." As Charlotte continued toward the courtyard, she could hear the ceremony continuing outside. General Whitmore's voice carried through the stone walls, strong and authoritative as he spoke about the traditions and responsibilities that the graduating cadets were about to embrace. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Charlotte, even at her young age. Here was a man speaking eloquently about military tradition while unknowingly demonstrating a subtle breach of that very tradition. The closer she got to her destination, the more Charlotte found herself questioning her own judgment. Was she really certain about what she had seen? Military protocol could be complex, and different situations might call for variations in standard procedures. Perhaps General Whitmore's salute had been correct for the specific circumstances of this ceremony, and her understanding was the one that was incomplete. But even as these doubts crept into her mind, Charlotte remembered the countless hours she had spent studying royal and military protocol with her tutors. Her education had been thorough and precise, designed to prepare her for a lifetime of public service, where attention to detail could mean the difference between honoring tradition and inadvertently causing offense. If there was one thing she was confident about, it was her understanding of proper saluting procedures. Charlotte reached the terrace that overlooked the main courtyard just as General Whitmore was concluding his address to the cadets. From this vantage point, she had a clear view of the entire ceremony, including Sergeant Patterson's position near the entrance. The ceremony was beautiful and moving, with the young cadets standing at perfect attention as they prepared to take their oaths of service. Sergeant James Patterson was exactly where Mrs. Henderson had indicated he would be. Charlotte had known him for almost 2 years, ever since her family had begun spending more time at Windsor Castle. Unlike some of the guards who maintained a strictly professional distance, Sergeant Patterson had always been willing to answer her questions about military life and protocol, treating her inquiries with the seriousness they deserved rather than dismissing them as childish curiosity. Patterson was in his early 30s, a career soldier who had served with distinction in several overseas deployments before being assigned to royal protection duties. He had a reputation for being both highly competent and genuinely caring about the people under his protection. Charlotte had observed that he treated everyone with the same level of respect, regardless of their rank or position, which had earned him the admiration of both his fellow soldiers and the royal household staff. As Charlotte watched from the terrace, she noticed that Sergeant Patterson was also observing the ceremony with professional interest. His position gave him a different angle than hers, and she wondered if he had noticed the same detail that had caught her attention. If he had, his training and experience would certainly give him a better understanding of how to handle the situation appropriately. The ceremony was moving toward its climax, with the cadets preparing to receive their commissioning documents from General Whitmore. This would involve another series of salutes, which meant that if Charlotte was going to act, she needed to do so quickly. Once the ceremony concluded and everyone dispersed, the opportunity to address the issue discreetly would be lost. Charlotte made her way down from the terrace, moving carefully to avoid drawing attention to herself. The castle's layout worked in her favor, with numerous alcoves and side passages that allowed her to approach Sergeant Patterson's position without crossing the main ceremonial area where her presence might disrupt the proceedings. As she drew closer, Charlotte could see the concentration on Sergeant Patterson's face as he monitored the ceremony and the surrounding area. Royal protection was a responsibility he took seriously, and she knew that approaching him during an active event would need to be handled carefully to avoid compromising his duties. Charlotte positioned herself in a spot where Patterson would be able to see her without having to turn away from his surveillance of the courtyard. She waited patiently until his routine scan of the area brought his eyes to her location, then made a subtle gesture that she hoped would convey her need to speak with him without alerting anyone else to her presence. Sergeant Patterson's trained eye immediately recognized Charlotte's signal. In his years of royal protection service, he had learned to read the subtle communications that members of the royal family sometimes needed to convey during public events. He could see that the young princess had something on her mind, and his protective instincts told him that it was something she considered important. Without breaking his professional demeanor or taking his attention away from the ceremony for more than a moment, Patterson made a slight adjustment to his position that would allow him to speak quietly with Charlotte while still maintaining his security responsibilities. It was a delicate balance, but one that his training and experience had prepared him to manage. "Your Royal Highness," he said quietly when Charlotte approached. "Is everything all right?" Charlotte had rehearsed this conversation in her mind during her journey through the castle, but now that the moment had arrived, she found herself struggling with how to begin. How did one tell an experienced soldier that a decorated general might have made a mistake? How did a 10-year-old princess question the actions of someone with decades of military service? "Sergeant Patterson," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been watching the ceremony, and I noticed something that I'm not sure about. I don't want to cause any problems, but I think there might have been an error in protocol." Patterson's expression remained neutral, but Charlotte could see the immediate attention her words had captured. This was a man who understood the importance of protocol and the potential consequences when it wasn't followed correctly. He also understood that Princess Charlotte's education had been thorough enough that if she thought she had noticed something, it was worth taking seriously. "What did you observe, Your Royal Highness?" he asked, his tone professional but encouraging. Charlotte took a deep breath, aware that once she spoke the words, there would be no taking them back. "When General Whitmore saluted the cadets at the beginning of the ceremony, I believe the form was incorrect for the specific military honors being presented. The angle of his hand and the duration of the salute didn't match what I've learned about protocol for commissioning ceremonies." Patterson considered this information carefully. His own military background included extensive training in ceremonial procedures, and he began mentally reviewing what he had observed during the ceremony. Charlotte's words triggered his own recollection of the general's salute, and as he thought about it more carefully, he began to see what the young princess might have noticed. The realization dawned on him gradually but unmistakably. Princess Charlotte was right. General Whitmore, perhaps influenced by his experience in different branches of service, or simply affected by the significance of the moment, had indeed used a salute that, while perfectly respectful and military in nature, was not the precise form called for by the specific protocols governing this type of ceremony. Patterson found himself in a position he had never encountered before. His duty was to protect the royal family, but it had never occurred to him that protection might sometimes involve helping them navigate situations where their knowledge and observational skills had uncovered issues that needed to be addressed. This was uncharted territory, and the decisions made in the next few minutes could have far-reaching consequences. "Your Royal Highness," Patterson said after a moment of consideration, "your observation shows remarkable attention to detail and understanding of military protocol. This is indeed a delicate situation that requires careful handling. Charlotte felt a mixture of relief and apprehension at Patterson's confirmation. Relief because it validated her observation and gave her confidence that she hadn't been mistaken. Apprehension because it meant that the situation was real and would require action of some kind. "What should we do?" Charlotte asked, the weight of responsibility evident in her young voice. Patterson looked out at the ceremony, which was now in its final phase. General Whitmore was presenting the commissioning documents to each cadet individually, and with each presentation came another salute. The incorrect form was being repeated, which meant that the issue was becoming more pronounced and more likely to be noticed by others, particularly if the ceremony was being recorded for official purposes. "We need to find a way to address this that preserves everyone's dignity while ensuring that proper protocol is maintained," Patterson said thoughtfully. "And I believe, Your Royal Highness, that you may be the only person here who can do that effectively." Charlotte felt her heart skip a beat. She had hoped that by bringing the issue to Sergeant Patterson's attention, she would be able to transfer responsibility to someone with more experience and authority. The idea that she might still need to take direct action was both thrilling and terrifying. "Me?" she asked, her voice small but determined. "Think about it, Your Royal Highness," Patterson explained quietly. "If I or another soldier were to approach the general during the ceremony, it could cause embarrassment and might even be seen as insubordination. But if a member of the royal family were to make a quiet observation about protocol, it would be received in an entirely different way. Your position gives you the authority to speak about such matters, and your age might actually work in your favor by making the correction seem less threatening." Charlotte understood the logic of what Patterson was saying, but the magnitude of what he was suggesting seemed overwhelming. She would need to approach General Whitmore, a man she barely knew, during an important ceremony, and politely point out an error in his military protocol. The very thought of it made her palms sweat and her heart race, but as she stood there, watching the ceremony continue and seeing the incorrect salute repeated with each cadet, Charlotte knew that Patterson was right. This was one of those moments that would define her character and set the pattern for how she would handle difficult situations throughout her life. She could choose the safe path and remain silent, or she could choose the difficult path and take responsibility for what she had observed. The ceremony was drawing to a close, and soon the opportunity would be lost forever. Charlotte looked at Sergeant Patterson one more time, seeking reassurance in his steady gaze. "I'll help you find the right moment and the right approach," Patterson promised. "But ultimately, Your Royal Highness, this is your decision to make." Charlotte nodded, feeling the weight of her royal heritage and the expectations it carried. She thought about her great-grandmother, her parents, and all the royal predecessors whose portraits lined the castle walls. They had all faced moments when duty called them to act despite their fears or uncertainty. "All right," Charlotte said, her voice growing stronger with determination. "Let's do this." The final moments of the ceremony unfolded with the precision and grandeur that made British military traditions legendary worldwide. Each cadet stepped forward to receive their commission, their faces glowing with pride and determination as they formally entered the ranks of the British Army's officer corps. The autumn sun had burned away the morning mist, bathing the ancient courtyard in golden light that seemed to bless the solemn proceedings. Charlotte stood beside Sergeant Patterson, her heart pounding with a rhythm that seemed to match the ceremonial drumbeat echoing off the castle walls. Every fiber of her being was focused on the task ahead, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to cross a threshold from which there would be no return. This moment would either demonstrate her worthiness to someday serve the crown, or it would reveal the folly of a 10-year-old girl who had overestimated her own understanding. General Whitmore moved through the commissioning ritual with the practiced ease of someone who had participated in countless such ceremonies throughout his distinguished career. His bearing remained impeccable, his voice strong and clear as he congratulated each new officer. To any casual observer, everything appeared perfect, a flawless execution of military tradition that would be remembered fondly by all who participated. But Charlotte's trained eye continued to catch the subtle incorrectness in his salute technique. With each repetition, she became more certain of her observation and more convinced that action was necessary. The general was using a salute more appropriate for naval ceremonies, where he had served early in his career, rather than the specific form required for army commissioning ceremonies. It was an understandable confusion, the kind of mistake that could happen to anyone familiar with multiple service traditions, but it was nonetheless incorrect for the current context. Sergeant Patterson had been quietly observing both the ceremony and Princess Charlotte, impressed by her composure, under what he recognized was considerable pressure. In his years of royal protection service, he had seen adult members of the royal family struggle with far less challenging situations. Charlotte's ability to remain focused and analytical while dealing with such a complex social and protocol issue spoke volumes about her character and her potential as a future leader. As the ceremony reached its conclusion, Patterson leaned closer to Charlotte and spoke in a voice so quiet it was barely audible. The general will likely remain for a few minutes after the formal proceedings to speak informally with the cadets and other officers. That will be your opportunity, Your Royal Highness. I'll position myself nearby to provide support if needed, but this conversation will need to be between you and him. Charlotte nodded, her mouth suddenly dry as the reality of what she was about to attempt fully hit her. She had met General Whitmore briefly during previous royal events, but they had never engaged in extended conversation. He had always struck her as a serious but kind man, someone who genuinely cared about the soldiers under his command and took pride in upholding military traditions. She hoped that these qualities would work in her favor when she approached him with her concerns. The formal ceremony concluded with the playing of the national anthem, the clear notes of God Save the King rising into the crisp autumn air. Charlotte felt a familiar stirring of emotion as she listened to the song that represented not just her country, but her family's commitment to service and duty. The words reminded her that she was part of something much larger than herself. An institution that had endured for centuries because people had been willing to uphold standards even when it was difficult or uncomfortable to do so. As the music faded and the formal military formations began to disperse, Charlotte saw her opportunity approaching. General Whitmore was indeed remaining in the courtyard, accepting congratulations from other officers and engaging in conversation with several of the newly commissioned cadets. His demeanor was relaxed and jovial, the kind of approachable warmth that good leaders displayed when formal duties had been completed successfully. Charlotte took a deep breath and began moving toward the general's position. Sergeant Patterson shadowed her movement at a discreet distance, ready to intervene if the situation became uncomfortable, but careful not to intrude on what needed to be a personal interaction between the princess and the general. As she walked across the courtyard, Charlotte became acutely aware of the weight of history around her. The same stones beneath her feet had witnessed countless moments of royal decision-making, from the momentous to the mundane. Kings and queens had walked these paths while wrestling with decisions that would affect millions of people. In comparison, her current task seemed both insignificant and overwhelming. Several people noticed her approach, including some of the newly commissioned officers who recognized her despite her relatively low public profile. Charlotte had learned early in life that being a member of the royal family meant that her actions were always being observed and evaluated, even in seemingly private moments. The knowledge that others were watching added another layer of pressure to an already challenging situation. General Whitmore was in the middle of a conversation with two young cadets when he noticed Princess Charlotte approaching. His military training immediately kicked in, and he straightened slightly, preparing to acknowledge her presence with the appropriate level of formal respect. Despite the informal nature of the post-ceremony gathering, protocol still required certain observances when interacting with members of the royal family. "Your Royal Highness," General Whitmore said with a warm smile as Charlotte drew near. "What a pleasant surprise. I hope you enjoyed watching the ceremony. These young officers represent the finest traditions of British military service." Charlotte felt a moment of panic as all eyes turned to her. The two cadets and several other nearby officers were now listening to the conversation, which meant that whatever she said would be witnessed by multiple people. The private correction she had envisioned was quickly becoming a more public interaction than she had anticipated. But rather than retreat, Charlotte drew upon the poise that had been instilled in her through years of royal training. She understood that leadership often meant acting gracefully under scrutiny, and this was clearly going to be one of those moments. "Thank you, General Whitmore," Charlotte replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "The ceremony was absolutely beautiful, and I could see how proud you are of these new officers." "Your words about tradition and service were very moving." General Whitmore beamed at the compliment, clearly pleased that the young princess had been paying attention to the ceremony's content rather than simply going through the motions of royal attendance.
"You're very kind, Your Royal Highness."
"Military tradition is something I care about deeply, and I hope that came through in today's proceedings."
This opening gave Charlotte exactly the transition she needed.
Her heart was racing, but her mind was clear as she prepared to navigate the delicate conversation ahead. Everything she had learned about diplomacy, tact, and leadership was about to be put to the test in a way she had never imagined. "That's actually something I wanted to speak with you about, if I may," Charlotte said, her tone respectful but confident. "I've been studying military protocol as part of my education, and I noticed something during the ceremony that I hoped you might help me understand." General Whitmore's expression became more attentive, clearly intrigued by the princess's interest in military matters. In his experience, most civilians, even well-educated ones, showed only passing interest in the finer points of military protocol. That a 10-year-old member of the royal family was asking specific questions about ceremonial procedures was both unexpected and impressive. "Of course, Your Royal Highness," he said. "I'm always happy to discuss military protocol. What aspect of the ceremony caught your attention?" Charlotte took another deep breath, aware that the next few sentences would determine whether this interaction became a positive learning experience or an awkward confrontation. She had chosen her words carefully during the walk across the courtyard, and now she would find out whether her diplomatic instincts were sound. "I was observing the saluting during the commissioning presentations," Charlotte began, "and I noticed that the forms seemed different from what I've learned about army ceremonial protocol. In my studies, I was taught that commissioning ceremonies require a specific salute technique, and I'm wondering if perhaps different circumstances call for variations that I haven't learned about yet." The genius of Charlotte's approach was immediately apparent to everyone listening. Rather than directly stating that the general had made an error, she had framed her observation as a learning opportunity. She was asking for instruction rather than offering correction, which allowed the general to maintain his dignity while still opening the door for discussion of the issue she had identified. General Whitmore paused, his experienced mind immediately processing what the young princess had said. As her words sank in, he began to replay his own actions during the ceremony, examining them with the kind of critical analysis that had made him successful throughout his military career. The realization of what had happened dawned on him gradually, and Charlotte could see the exact moment when he understood what she was gently pointing out. His face went through a series of subtle expressions as he processed the situation. First came recognition of his error, then a flash of embarrassment, followed quickly by what appeared to be admiration for the tactful way Charlotte had brought the matter to his attention. As a leader himself, he could appreciate the skill with which she had navigated such a delicate situation. "Your Royal Highness," General Whitmore said after a moment, his voice carrying a note of genuine respect, "your observation is not only correct, but demonstrates a remarkable understanding of military protocol. You're absolutely right that army commissioning ceremonies call for a specific salute form, and I'm afraid I allowed my experience across multiple services to influence my technique inappropriately."
The admission was made with the grace and honesty that characterize truly great leaders.
Rather than becoming defensive or dismissive, General Whitmore acknowledged the error and praised Charlotte for her knowledge and her diplomatic approach to pointing it out. The officers listening to the conversation exchanged glances of surprise and admiration, both for the general's graceful handling of the correction and for the young princess's remarkable poise and expertise. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention," the general continued. "It's a reminder that learning never stops, regardless of rank or experience. Would you mind if I ask where you learned about ceremonial protocol? Your education appears to be quite comprehensive." Charlotte felt a wave of relief wash over her as she realized that the conversation had gone better than she had dared to hope. General Whitmore's response demonstrated exactly the kind of leadership she had been taught to respect, someone who valued accuracy and learning over ego or appearances. "I've been fortunate to learn from many excellent teachers," Charlotte replied, "including my grandfather, the king, and my father, who both emphasized the importance of understanding military traditions. I also work with tutors who help me study the historical and ceremonial aspects of royal and military protocol." "Well, they've done an exceptional job," General Whitmore said warmly. "Your attention to detail and your diplomatic skills are truly impressive. And I must say, the way you approach this conversation shows wisdom far beyond your years."
One of the young cadets who had been listening to the exchange stepped forward slightly, clearly moved by what he had witnessed.
"If I may, sir," he said to the general, "and your Royal Highness, this has been an incredible example of how leaders should handle learning opportunities. Thank you both for demonstrating the kind of grace and professionalism we should all strive for." The comment sparked nods of agreement from the other officers present, and Charlotte realized that what could have been an embarrassing situation for General Whitmore had instead become a positive example of leadership and continuous learning. The general's willingness to accept correction gracefully had actually enhanced his reputation rather than damaging it, while Charlotte's diplomatic approach had demonstrated the kind of wisdom that would serve her well in her future royal duties. General Whitmore turned back to Charlotte with a smile that conveyed both gratitude and genuine admiration. "Your Royal Highness, would you be willing to demonstrate the correct salute form? I think it would be valuable for all of us to see the proper technique, and it would help ensure that I don't repeat this error in future ceremonies." Charlotte felt a moment of surprise at the request, but she quickly realized that this was the perfect way to conclude their interaction. By asking her to demonstrate the correct protocol, General Whitmore was acknowledging her expertise, while also ensuring that the lesson would be reinforced for everyone present. "I would be honored to, General," Charlotte replied, moving to a position where everyone could see her clearly. As she assumed the proper stance and executed the precise salute form required for army commissioning ceremonies, Charlotte felt a sense of completion that went far beyond the simple correction of a protocol error. She had successfully navigated one of the most challenging situations she had ever faced, and in doing so, she had demonstrated the kind of leadership qualities that would define her approach to royal service for years to come. The applause that followed her demonstration was spontaneous and heartfelt, a recognition not just of her technical knowledge but of the mature and diplomatic way she had handled the entire situation. General Whitmore led the applause, his face showing the kind of pride that comes from witnessing true character in action. As the group began to disperse and the post-ceremony conversations resumed, Charlotte caught sight of Sergeant Patterson standing nearby, his face showing a mixture of pride and professional satisfaction. She had succeeded beyond his expectations, and she could see in his expression that he understood the significance of what had just occurred. The morning that had begun with uncertainty and anxiety had transformed into a defining moment of growth and accomplishment. Princess Charlotte had proven to herself and others that she possessed the knowledge, wisdom, and diplomatic skills necessary to serve the crown with distinction. More importantly, she had learned that sometimes the most difficult conversations can lead to the most positive outcomes, as long as they are approached with respect, humility, and genuine concern for doing what is right. As she made her way back toward the castle, Charlotte reflected on the morning's events and the lessons they had taught her. She had entered the day as a 10-year-old princess with a good education and sharp observational skills. She was leaving it as someone who had successfully navigated a complex leadership challenge and earned the respect of experienced military officers. The transformation felt profound, even though she understood that it was really just the beginning of a lifetime of such moments and decisions. The news of Princess Charlotte's remarkable morning spread through Windsor Castle with the quiet efficiency that characterized all palace communications. It wasn't gossip or scandal that moved through the corridors, but rather a story of wisdom, courage, and leadership that left everyone who heard it feeling proud and inspired. By the time Charlotte returned to her rooms, her parents had already been briefed on the morning's events, and the reaction was everything she had hoped for and more. Prince William was the first to greet his daughter when she entered the family's private dining room for a delayed breakfast. His face showed a mixture of pride and amazement that Charlotte had never seen before, and she could tell immediately that he had heard not just the basic facts of what had occurred, but the full details of how she had handled such a delicate situation. "Charlotte," Prince William said, rising from his chair as she approached. "I understand you've had quite an eventful morning." "I'm told you demonstrated some remarkable diplomatic skills during General Whitmore's ceremony." Charlotte felt a blush creep up her cheeks as she took her place at the table. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation with the general was beginning to fade, and she was starting to fully comprehend the magnitude of what she had accomplished. "I just noticed something that didn't seem right," she said, trying to downplay her actions. "Sergeant Patterson helped me figure out what to do about it." Princess Catherine, who had been listening from across the table, set down her cup of tea and looked at her daughter with the kind of maternal pride that made Charlotte's heart swell. "From what we've heard, you handled yourself with exceptional grace and maturity. General Whitmore himself called to express his admiration for your knowledge and your diplomatic approach." This news surprised Charlotte considerably. She had hoped that the general wouldn't be offended by her intervention, but she hadn't expected him to contact her parents to comment on the situation. The fact that his response had been positive rather than critical felt like final confirmation that she had indeed done the right thing. "He called?" Charlotte asked, unable to hide her curiosity about what the conversation might have entailed. Prince William nodded, his expression growing more serious as he prepared to share the full scope of the morning's impact. "He did indeed. General Whitmore wanted us to know how impressed he was, not just with your knowledge of military protocol, but with the way you approached him. He said that in all his years of service, he had rarely encountered such a perfect example of how to offer correction without causing offense or embarrassment." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of King Charles, who had requested to join the family breakfast as soon as he had learned about Charlotte's morning adventure. His presence always brought a certain formality to family gatherings, but Charlotte could see warmth and pride in his eyes that transcended royal protocol. "Grandfather," Charlotte said, rising to curtsy as she had been taught. But King Charles waved her back to her seat with an affectionate smile. "None of that this morning, my dear," he said, settling into his chair. "I've just had the most fascinating conversation with General Whitmore, and I wanted to hear your version of events directly from you." Charlotte found herself retelling the story of her morning, from her initial observation at the bedroom window, through her decision to seek out Sergeant Patterson's advice, and finally to her careful approach to the General himself. As she spoke, she watched her family's faces, seeing their reactions to each part of her narrative. What struck her most was how seriously they were taking her account. Rather than treating it as a charming anecdote about a precocious child, they were listening to her story as they would to a briefing from an adult family member who had successfully handled a significant diplomatic challenge. The respect implicit in their attention was both humbling and empowering. "The aspect that impresses me most," King Charles said when Charlotte had finished her account, "is how you framed your observation as a learning opportunity rather than a correction. That shows an understanding of human nature and diplomatic relations that many adults never master." Prince William leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "Charlotte, I'm curious about something. When you first noticed the error in the General's salute, what was your initial instinct? Did you immediately think about speaking up, or did you consider just letting it go?" Charlotte paused to consider the question carefully, wanting to give an honest answer rather than one that might sound more impressive. "At first, I thought I should probably just ignore it," she admitted. "I mean, who am I to question a general?" But then I remembered what great-grandmother used to say about how truth and accuracy were more important than comfort, and I realized that staying quiet might not be the right thing to do.
Princess Catherine reached across the table to squeeze Charlotte's hand.
That's exactly the right way to think about such situations. The easy choice isn't always the right choice, and sometimes we have to act on principle even when it makes us uncomfortable. As the family continued their discussion over breakfast, Charlotte began to understand that the morning's events had significance beyond her own personal growth. Her parents and grandfather were seeing in her actions evidence of the kind of character and judgment that would be essential for her future role as a senior member of the royal family. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Charlotte's private secretary, Ms. Thompson, who approached the table with the kind of urgent politeness that indicated important news. King Charles gestured for her to speak, and she delivered information that would expand the story's impact far beyond the walls of Windsor Castle. "Your Majesty, Your Royal Highnesses," Ms. Thompson began. "I've received several inquiries from media outlets about this morning's ceremony. It appears that the interaction between Princess Charlotte and General Whitmore was observed by more people than we initially realized, and word has begun to spread about what occurred." Charlotte felt a moment of panic at this news. The idea that her morning's actions might become public knowledge was both thrilling and terrifying. She had handled the situation well in the private context of the ceremony, but the prospect of public scrutiny was an entirely different challenge. King Charles, however, appeared pleased rather than concerned by this development. "What kind of inquiries are we receiving?" he asked Ms. Thompson. "Entirely positive, Your Majesty," she replied. "The reports I'm hearing describe Princess Charlotte's actions as an example of exceptional diplomatic skill and military knowledge. General Whitmore has apparently been quite vocal in his praise, and several of the newly commissioned officers have shared their admiration for how the situation was handled." Prince William and Princess Catherine exchanged a glance that Charlotte recognized as one of their silent parental communications. After a moment, Prince William turned to his daughter with a question that would prove to be pivotal. "Charlotte," he said, "how would you feel about this story becoming more widely known? It's entirely your choice, and we can certainly work to keep it private if that's what you prefer." Charlotte considered the question carefully, weighing her natural desire for privacy against the potential positive impact of sharing the story. She thought about the young cadets who had been present during her conversation with General Whitmore, and how their expressions had shown that they had been inspired by what they had witnessed. "If the story can help other people understand the importance of speaking up when they notice something wrong," Charlotte said slowly, "then maybe it's okay for people to know about it. But I don't want it to seem like I was trying to show off or embarrass General Whitmore." King Charles smiled at his granddaughter's response, clearly impressed by her continued focus on the well-being of others, rather than her own recognition. "I think we can ensure that any public discussion of the events emphasizes the positive aspects of leadership and learning that were demonstrated by everyone involved." Over the following days, the story of Princess Charlotte's diplomatic intervention did indeed become widely known, but in exactly the way her family had hoped it would. Rather than being portrayed as a story about a child correcting an adult, the media coverage focused on the exceptional character and wisdom demonstrated by both Charlotte and General Whitmore. The general himself gave several interviews in which he praised Charlotte's knowledge and diplomatic skills, while also using the opportunity to discuss the importance of continuous learning and graceful acceptance of feedback in military leadership. His willingness to acknowledge his error publicly and to praise the young princess who had pointed it out, transformed what could have been an embarrassing incident into a powerful teaching moment about humility and leadership. Educational institutions across the country began using the story as an example of how to approach difficult conversations with respect and diplomacy. Military academies incorporated it into their leadership training programs, and business schools discussed it as a case study in effective communication and conflict resolution. The newly commissioned officers who had witnessed the original interaction found themselves in demand as speakers at various events, where they shared their first-hand account of watching a 10-year-old princess demonstrate leadership skills that impressed seasoned military professionals. Their testimonials consistently emphasized Charlotte's grace, knowledge, and maturity, helping to reinforce the positive message of the story. Perhaps most importantly, the incident established Princess Charlotte in the public mind as someone with both the knowledge and the courage to uphold standards, even in difficult circumstances. This reputation would serve her well in future royal engagements, where her opinions and observations would be taken seriously by people who might otherwise dismiss the views of someone so young. Sergeant Patterson, who had played such a crucial role in supporting Charlotte during the critical moments of decision, found himself commended by his superiors for his excellent judgment in recognizing the princess's concern and helping her address it appropriately. His career continued to flourish, and he would later credit the morning's events as a turning point in his understanding of what it meant to truly serve the royal family. Within the royal household, Charlotte's actions became the subject of quiet pride and frequent reference. Staff members who had watched her grow up saw in her behavior confirmation of what they had long suspected about her potential as a future leader. Her governess reported significant improvements in Charlotte's confidence and her willingness to engage with challenging topics in her studies. The story also had an unexpected impact on Charlotte's relationship with her brothers. Prince George, who was being prepared for his own future role as king, began seeking out his sister's advice on matters of protocol and diplomacy. Prince Louis, despite being younger, started paying closer attention to the lessons about leadership and service that were part of all the royal children's education. As weeks passed and the immediate excitement around the story began to fade, Charlotte found that the morning's events had indeed changed her in lasting ways. The confidence she had gained from successfully navigating such a challenging situation stayed with her, influencing how she approached everything from her academic studies to her public engagements. Teachers and tutors noticed that she asked more thoughtful questions and was more willing to engage with complex topics that required analysis and judgment. During family discussions about royal duties and responsibilities, she contributed ideas and observations that demonstrated a maturing understanding of leadership and service. The story's impact extended beyond Charlotte herself to influence how the entire royal family approached their public duties. The positive response to Charlotte's combination of knowledge, courage, and diplomacy reinforced their commitment to thorough preparation and principled action in all their endeavors. Years later, when Princess Charlotte would face other challenging situations requiring difficult decisions and diplomatic skill, she would often remember the morning when she was 10 years old and learned that doing the right thing, even when it was uncomfortable, could lead to outcomes far more positive than she had ever imagined. The guard who had watched it all unfold, Sergeant Patterson, would indeed say that it was the moment he truly understood what it meant to serve, not just the crown, but the character beneath it. And General Whitmore, whose graceful acceptance of correction had turned a potential embarrassment into a triumph of leadership, would carry the lessons of that morning with him for the rest of his distinguished career. In the end, Princess Charlotte's defining moment at 10 years old became something far greater than a simple correction of military protocol. It became a story about courage, wisdom, respect, and the kind of leadership that inspires others to be better than they thought they could be. It was, perhaps, exactly the kind of story that would be told about someone destined to wear the crown with distinction and serve her people with both strength and grace.